Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump have had a very good relationship even when he was the 45th president.
Right.
And the two really, they really jam together in many ways. They respect each other for what they are capable of and how do they promote their own country. I'm talking about the Indian bureaucracy which sits in the Commerce Ministry.
Sure.
If they can be smart enough to do a good trade deal with the US by this autumn, then let me tell you, sky is the limit of the bilateral relationship. President Trump, without anybody sort of really prompting him, he said, listen, I'm willing to extradite Tahawwur Rana.
Yeah.
Tahawwur Rana is the key to the 26/11 attacks. So for the first time, you have a commitment from the US to ensure that these fringe Khalistani extremists are taken to task and held accountable. India and US share the fight on terrorism, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And the top up is that no more Khalistani activity will be going unchecked in the US. US is not interested in interfering in the Indian neighborhood.
Right.
It wants India to play the lead role, and it wants India to sort out or negotiate with the neighborhood.
Better negotiator than me. That's what Donald Trump had to say about Prime Minister Modi, who was recently in the US, where the two leaders, along with their respective contingents, were involved in intense negotiations over several key bilateral issues, including trade, tariff, defense cooperation, deportation, terrorism, among other things. Several important announcements have already been made, and now both countries will endeavor to complete the first segment of a significant trade agreement by autumn of this year. Hello and welcome. I'm Abhishek Singh, and you're watching the Hindustan Times podcast. I'm joined by my senior colleague, the executive editor of Hindustan Times, Mr. Shishir Gupta. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time. And to begin with, I want to talk to you specifically about the bonhomie, which was, of course, in the news before the Prime Minister even left the country, and especially after Donald Trump made the kind of statement that he did. Coming from him, somebody who doesn't like to offer praise to a lot of people, that's definitely high praise. So let's start there, sir. What do you think of that?
See, Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump have had a very good relationship even when he was the 45th president.
Right.
And the two really, they really jam together in many ways. And the two leaders understand the popularity of each other in their respective countries. He has seen Prime Minister Modi in Houston, that is Howdy Modi, then Namaste Trump. He has seen that. He has seen the crowds. He has seen how people are actually following Modi, how they look towards him. So there is a genuine respect between the two leaders, and that respect is obviously translated into a whole lot of a convergence, a whole lot of essentially understanding that these two are the most popular leaders of democratic world.
Right.
And they respect each other for what they are capable of and how do they promote their own country. One talks about making America great again, the other talks about Bharat first, now it is making India great again, and the two joined hands to become mega.
Yeah.
So in Washington, it was a mega show, actually, in many ways, where both leaders reach out to each other. There was a lot of convergence, a lot of synergy between the two leaders, and that is what is translated into a very, very good, very, very productive summit.
Productive summit. Interestingly, before the Prime Minister, arrived in the US, everybody was talking about how tariffs, on that front, at least there might be an escalation, because if Donald Trump's going to impose tariffs on India, perhaps India can also respond. But it was perhaps a personal bonhomie between, the two big leaders that ended up sort of, becoming the headline instead. Having said that, sir, that's about the optics. Now let's talk about the substance of this, meeting between the two countries, two leaders. What do you think are some of the key takeaways of this bilateral? And then, of course, we will talk about them specifically as well.
You see, the first thing very clearly in this whole thing is, while Prime Minister Modi is on way to Delhi right now, and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar is on way to Munich Security Summit.
Right.
What has happened is that some very key outcomes have come out of the meeting. But there have been clear bottom lines defined. People know what to do, how to do. But underscoring everything is a trade deal. Now, if India, when I say India, I'm not talking about the negotiator that President Trump praised.
Right.
I'm talking about the Indian bureaucracy which sits in the Commerce Ministry.
Sure.
If they can be smart enough to do a good trade deal with the US by this autumn, then let me tell you, sky is the limit of the bilateral relationship.
Right.
Now, first of all, you will buy oil and gas. You need oil and gas for your own energy security. He's willing to give you help in AI. He's willing to give you help in semiconductor chips. He's talking about top-end military security equipment. Sure. When I say top-end, this equipment, for instance, like they talked about, US is willing to give India the F-35 fifth generation fighter. Now, let me tell you, Abhishek, F-35 is the only fifth generation fighter, and the Chinese are attempting one, which is J-35, which is actually a copy of what F-35 is. The Russians don't have it. They call it Su-57, but it is not really a fifth generation fighter.
Right.
So he's offering you the top end technology. He's offering you underwater domain awareness by underwater drones, which the Chinese are developing in a big way. He's offering you, he's telling you, listen, I am not going to give you a political lecture. I am not going to interfere in you. I mean, you deal with Bangladesh, you want to deal with whatever it is, but the fundamental thing which underscores everything is a good trade deal, which essentially is the requirement of the day.
Right.
And that is what this entire thing is hinged on. Now, it is for the Commerce Ministry, Indian Commerce Ministry, and their counterparts in US to work out a mutually acceptable deal, a deal which can be a win-win for both parties.
Yeah.
And that is where it all starts.
Right. Yeah, it's been such a paradox. I mean, on one hand, cooperation between the two countries has been expanding for a while now, and it did under various precedents, not just under President Donald Trump, but at the same time, it always remained a little, under where it should be. It underperformed on that front. So, of course, I mean, we'll talk about it again, perhaps when it is time to dot the I's and cross the T's. But there's some more things which came out of it, and it's very refreshing to see that US is not going to be patronizing us on several of the things that US has in the past. And one key announcement and one key outcome perhaps was, of course, related to terrorism. We will talk about, both sides. I mean, we'll talk about both elements, I'm sorry. One is, of course, Khalistan, and then, of course, the Islamic terrorism. So how about we start there? Because, of course, a key mastermind of 2611 will also be handed over to India. So let's go there. Let's talk about that, and then we will talk about Khalistan.
You see, what has happened is that during the bilateral conversation and whatever I could sort of, elucidate out of it, is that President Trump, without anybody sort of really prompting him, he said, listen, I'm willing to extradite Tahawwur Rana.
Yeah.
Tahawwur Rana is the key to the 2611 attacks.
Right.
Tahawwur Rana is the man who had sent David Coleman Hadley to do a recce of all the targets in Bombay, in Delhi, and in all the places where Lashkar-e-Taiba wanted to attack. Tahawwur Rana is also possibly the only man who knows the local angle in the entire attack.
Right.
The attack in which 166 nationals were killed, including 6 Americans, and 200 odd were injured, and it was a horrible massacre that happened. So Tahawwur Rana, giving Tahawwur Rana, extraditing somebody who's a Canadian national of Pakistani origin and is being extradited to India, that itself is a very big ticket item.
Right.
First of all. Second thing is, what has happened in all this is that when President Donald Trump spoke, He said, I'm going to extradite this very evil man called Tahawwur Rana, but there's a list of more. Now that list of more, and if you read the joint statement, that is para 35, it says very clearly about Khalistani extremists. So for the first time, you have a commitment from the US to ensure that these fringe Khalistani extremists are taken to task and held accountable.
Right.
Now, this itself is a huge message because this will resonate all over Europe, all over countries like Canada,
Right.
countries like UK, which have been doing all sorts of shady activities and at the same time trying to lecture India on human rights.
Right.
So this is what it has happened. So basically what he has said is that India and US share the fight on terrorism, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And the top up is that no more Khalistani activity will be going unchecked in the US.
And that's very interesting because, I mean, that's been one of the long-standing demands of India with not just the US, with other European countries as well. So perhaps the messaging from what Donald Trump has said will, of course, as you were also saying, will perhaps be something which the European leaders will also perhaps start following, especially Canada. Having said that, there is also interestingly in that statement, as you also briefly mentioned, touched upon it, is something about Pakistan and the terrorism originating out of Pakistan. Talk to us for a little while about that, sir.
You see, what has happened is that in this entire bilateral meeting, the Prime Minister was there for 36 hours only.
Yeah.
And Prime Minister talked about cross-border terrorism. Now, what is happening is, if you look at Pakistan, whenever there is any bilateral meeting between India and US, whenever, there will be always a terrorist attack or something or the other. 2 days before this, there was a conflagration on the LOC.
Yes.
The Indians retaliated and 2 of our officers also were killed in that entire thing. Yeah. So these people deliberately target to sort of showcase that there is this lot of ferment going on the LOC. There is a possibility of war, so on and so forth. But the point in all this is that the US now understands the game very well. They understand the Pakistani perfidy. We know them, what they are all about. So the point in this is that there is pressure now in Pakistan to deliver on cross-border terrorism. Because they have a bigger problem on their western border, which is Afghanistan.
Right.
So they are actually caught between devil and deep sea right now, so to speak. Because if they do anything, there will be definitely a retaliation.
Right.
And with US saying very clearly that it is with India on this Islamic terrorism or on Khalistani extremism, I think these two activities will certainly go down, and Pakistan will definitely get a message.
And also pretty much gave India a free hand as far as Bangladesh is concerned. He said in as many words, the President of America, that, I will leave Bangladesh to Prime Minister Modi.
Well, that's a very important point, Abhishek, but let me give you a little background to it.
Sure.
You see, he is not the only one. What had happened was that I am told that French President Macron also communicated to India through National Security Advisor Ajit Doval that we will seek your guidance on Bangladesh.
Okay.
But this was a message which was quietly delivered. But here is President Donald Trump, who openly says so, saying that it is for Prime Minister Modi to handle Bangladesh. Now, essentially, this means that US is not interested in interfering in the Indian neighborhood.
Right.
It wants India to play the lead role, and it wants India to sort out or negotiate with the neighborhood. So it's a very, very big message. Now, the only thing is, I hope that Dhaka under Muhammad Yunus understands what it all means.
Right.
Because no longer you have the safety net or the rubric of human rights or democracy or freedom or whatever it is.
Right.
Fact of the matter is that the minorities are getting killed over there. There is increased radicalization over there, and this could spill over any day.
Yeah, yeah. And it was important for India to get President Trump to talk about it.
Right.
And since we're talking about India's neighbors and perhaps nemesis as well, let's talk about the last and perhaps the biggest one, of course, China as well. So how do you think China will be looking at this bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump?
Let me tell you, China understands the language of power. I will recall you way back when the 2005 nuclear deal happened. It was at that particular point of time that China recognized Sikkim as part of India. For US to have good relations with India means that China will also have to accommodate India rather than go with outright friction with India on either land borders or on the sea borders.
Right.
But it is between the two leaders, that is Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, to actually work out as to what do they want to do to ensure that the borders, that there is peace and tranquility on the borders, and that the Indo-Pacific is managed through freedom of navigation rather than expansionism of the PLA Navy.
Right, right. And I briefly want to get back to the trade deal and one particular element of it, and which some people are calling a masterstroke. So India and US have a trade deficit, in the sense that trade imbalance, I'm sorry. So the total trade is around $118 billion, and there is a surplus of $32 billion with respect to, the trade, right? So India definitely is in an advantageous position. So the masterstroke perhaps is that trade imbalance, which is perhaps one of the primary concerns that Donald Trump has. India can easily fill that gap by importing some of our needs, or perhaps a significant amount, from the US.
No, you're very right when you say that, but then there is a larger issue of energy.
Right.
Let me just get back to that on that.
Sure.
You see, what has happened is that in the budget itself, we have made a certain amount of sort of changes or proposed changes in the Atomic Energy Act as well as civil liability that ensures that the Indo-US civilian nuclear deal may be finally operationalized. Because if you are going to make changes and amendments in the Atomic Energy Act and the civil nuclear liability issue, then the private sector can join hands to have small modular reactors as well as operationalize big reactors in India for clean energy. Right. One is that. Second thing, when it's coming to oil and gas, you see, ultimately India is a net importer. Yeah. And so whether I do it from Iraq or whichever place I'll get the cheapest, I will do that. Yeah. So India is already buying about 15 billion worth of it, and they want to increase it to 25 billion of it. So the point is that, you are telling US that, listen, I am willing to buy from you. Yeah. And US is willing to sell. So this brings you all the more together. True. And the other thing is then the oil prices definitely go down, which is the fundamental thing which helps your economics, which helps the energy security of the country. So I think it's a win-win thing. But as I said, in all this, the bottom line is a good trade deal. A smart trade deal will only ensure if things go in the right direction. Right. Because it's very clear. See, he is, I'm told that the US has agreed to merit-based immigration. India has agreed to deportation of illegal immigration. So the only topic that remains is the trade deal. Right. Now, if you can negotiate the trade deal properly, then you actually ensure that US comes totally on your side, because there is no other issue on which there is a disagreement or there is even a slight bit of friction. Right. Right? You yourself have problems. Right now you are running into a huge deficit with China. Right? So the point is, he is not, what he's saying is actually, he wants to help his own country, just like you want to help your own country. Of course. So that's what it is. So the point is, if you can, and the fact is, he said that, Prime Minister Modi is a great negotiator. I mean, and he has no contest. But it is not Prime Minister Modi. It is the great bureaucracy of India that has to sit down, that has to put its head down, that has to be smart enough to come out with a deal which does not economically hurt India, which actually gives a sort of a position where both sides can say, listen, we have done our job and it's a win-win for Indo-US relations.
Do you think, we have already avoided the obvious pitfall, which I was recently talking to Mark Linscott. He was the senior advisor. He currently is the senior advisor to US ISPF and worked in President Trump's first administration. So somebody who knows the system well, somebody who understands President Trump and how he works. And he said one of the ways in which, India perhaps can screw this up is by entering into an escalating tariff war, which India has very successfully avoided to do, because we have, of course, even before the Prime Minister went there, Narendra Sitharaman, the Finance Minister, in the budget had already announced some concessions. And of course, President Trump also, while doing the press conference, very briefly mentioned that reciprocal tariff, nothing else, nothing more. So that pitfall definitely has been avoided. So is there any other challenge that you see other than that?
Let me tell you something very clearly.
Sure.
President Trump is his own man. It's very, very difficult to predict him. Right. You may have worked with him or whatever it is. Let me tell you, people who, the Indian officials, the ministers, the NSA and everybody who went with him, they had all talked to their counterparts before this meeting. Right? Mm-hmm. And yet, nobody was sure as to what is going to come out of it. Right. Because he's his own man, he thinks at the spur of the spot, and he thinks which is in the best way, where he helps his American electorate, where he helps the American people. Right. Similarly, Prime Minister Modi is his own man, he's his own thinker, he understands things very well. He doesn't sort of really need advice on that, because he's been there for 15 years now. Right. So the point in this is that these two people, they know each other's minds on this whole thing. They know how nationalistic are they to their own respective countries. So I seriously think there was no question that President Trump would have announced any India-specific tariff. There was no question, because he knows what Narendra Modi is all about. Narendra Modi is not the person who is going to take it lying down. So it was very clear from day one, and had been communicated also, that it is going to be global tariffs. If there is going to be a policy change, it is going to be a global tariff change, of which India could possibly have a collateral damage. Right. Not that there is going to be anything India specific. Now, people would want to say, no, actually, he would do it, let the moment Prime Minister lands, he's going to impose tariffs. No, this is not the way it works. Yeah. Nobody's a fool. Yeah. Everybody understands what India is all about. Everybody understands India and US are very close natural allies. They are Quad partners. They have been, they virtually share, it's a very, very close relationship, right? And it's a relationship where the two can not only argue with each other, they can sort of, have a huge discussion on the issue. But at the end of it, there are two democratic countries which have a very shared vision of what the future of the world is going to be.
Right. And I think in geopolitics, if two countries can have that kind of equation where disagreeing and agreeing both are possible based on issues, that's a great position to be in for any country, and definitely under this government in India and under the Trump administration in the US, perhaps India and US are finding themselves in that spot. So on that note, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time and talking to us.
Thank you.